Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen, once again, and today we are discussing Robert Frost's very famous poem, Desert Places. Robert Lee Frost was an American poet. His work was initially published in England before it was published in America. Known for his realistic depictions of rural life and his command of American colloquial speech, Frost frequently wrote about settings from rural life in New England in the early 20th century, using them to examine complex social and philosophical themes. So, in his early years, he was a dropout of school. He left his school and he worked with his mother. Then he wrote a poem, and that was sold to a newspaper in his adult years. And then his grandfather bought a farm where he was supposed to live and tend and take care of it. So he spent 9 years there. And in those 9 years, Frost kept writing his poems, and his farming also became successful. Meanwhile, he married a girl, and it was a good change in his life. But most of his life, apart from being a poet, was a tragic one. His mother died. His father died in very early age, and his sister died, and she was before death she was admitted in mental hospital because she was mentally retarded. And Frost had a daughter who was also mentally retarded, and she died. So on the whole, Frost had a very complex and tragic life. So his tragedy is sometimes obvious. His being alone, his loneliness is sometimes conspicuous through his poems. Moreover, we can see an addition of his personal life in certain poems regarding the regional effect that we see. That most of his poems, especially written in the time of New England, where he spent 9 years, he talks about all those areas, region, society, birds, animals, sceneries, snow. So all the things, all the settings that he saw in New England, he discusses them all. As far as his works are concerned, they're discussed in the next slide, but to tell you about them in short, that he received Pulitzer Prizes and his works were well known. His poems were hallmark of American literature, and the themes mostly that he uses are, like, he talks about snow, which is a dominant symbol. He talks about loneliness, which is again a dominant symbol. Then he talks about the inner loneliness of a person versus external environment. So that is again a big theme for Frost. So we find conflict in most of the poems of John Keats. There's external or internal conflict, there's conflict of ideologies, there's conflict of theories, there's conflict of two opposing ideas, there's conflict of making a choice. So we find conflict in most of his poems. We find escapism in Frost's poems. He talks about going to escapism to his imagination, but his escapism is unlike that of John Keats. Keats wants to go to escapism, but he doesn't want to come back. Frost knows that Earth is the place to live, so he wants to go to escapism, and he wants to come back to the world. So this is where they are diverting from each other. So Frost is a lover of nature. So nature is again a vivid theme of the poetry of Robert Frost. So he talks about nature, and he talks about that regional era where he spent 9 years. So as far as his achievements are concerned, he received Pulitzer Prizes in 1924 for New Hampshire, a poem with notes and grace notes; 1931 for collected poems; 1937 for the range; 1943 for our witness tree. So 4 times he got Pulitzer Prizes. He was Poet Laureate of Vermont. He was Nobel Prize nominee for 31 times. And President John F. Kennedy, he used remarks for Robert Frost that he is the national American poet. So this was a big remark for Frost. Snow falling and night falling fast, oh fast. In a field I looked into going past, and the ground almost covered smooth in snow, but a few weeds and stubble showing last. The woods round it have it is theirs. All animals are smothered in their lairs. I am too absent spirited to count. The loneliness includes me unawares. And lonely as it is, that loneliness will be more lonely ere it will be less. A blanker whiteness, a benighted snow, with no expression, nothing to express. They cannot scare me with their empty spaces, between stars on stars, where no human race is. I have it in me so much nearer home, to scare myself with my own desert places. In the first stanza of the poem, the speaker describes two things that are falling, the snow and the night, and both are in different ways falling down onto the land. And he emphasizes through repetition that the fact that the night is coming fast, and these are the emotional observations that come to speaker as he is moving through the snowy blanket. He was in a field and going past when he noticed how the ground was almost covered in the snow. And there was so much on the ground that it has smothered everything out almost anyway, and the pure whiteness had yet to obscure a few weeds and stubble of the grass and plowed land sticking up. So these were the last of everything else that is now hidden under the layer of the snow. It has now come to the land fast, wiped out visually anyway, most of the vegetations in the ground. So almost everything is smothered. So everything is covered with the whiter blanket there. And then he talks about the woods. So he talks about the jungle, which is itself a mysterious object, which is itself a deadly thing. So he says even the jungle, even the trees are feeling it. It is theirs. It is very much with them. So it means loneliness. He's talking about loneliness, that all animals are smothered in their lair. So smothered is very forceful kind of word that he has used, that animals are forced to get into their lair. So they're so afraid of this kind of snow and loneliness, because like we know that animals are wild in nature and they're not afraid of these climatical changes. Yes, human beings are afraid of them, and when it is raining, when it is scorching heat, human beings do not tend to go out, but animals can. They are not much afraid of it. So in this loneliness, even animals are smothered in their lairs. Even they are forced to get into their lairs. So even they are not outside at this time. So the poet says, I am too absent-minded to count, and the loneliness includes me unawares. So the poet says that I am this much lonely, or this much absent-spirited, that I am unable to see what is happening outside or sideways. So he is not noticing the loneliness around him. He is not noticing the snow. He is not noticing the animals. He is not noticing that is there any other person except him who is outside and moving through this deadly or terrible atmosphere. He is not noticing anything, because he is more concerned with the loneliness that is inside him. So the loneliness within the heart and mind of the poet preoccupies the loneliness that is outside. So inward loneliness is more influencing the mind of the poet than the outside loneliness, which has even forced animals to go into their lairs. But the poet is not bothered with. There is no way for a reader to get through this poem without realizing that loneliness is the most important theme of this poem. So in the third stanza, Frost speaker uses the word 3 times, the word loneliness. He goes back to what he was saying before, and he adds on to this that he is only going to be more lonely before it will be less. So he is expecting the time yet to come in which he'll be feeling more loneliness, outside and inside, like within and without. When he talks about the climatical condition where he's moving, he says when it will be time of night, since even in the daytime all the animals, all the humans, all the birds, they are inside their houses, their lairs, their nests, no one is coming out. And at the time of night the outer atmosphere will be more lonelier, and so will be the inner atmosphere of the poet's heart and mind, that he will start to feel more lonely without any expression, and he'll have nothing to express, because everything will, whatever he's talking about, will be suffering from this loneliness. And then he says, they cannot scare me with their empty spaces. You must have read a story, like an essay in the beginning classes. It was The Dying Sun. So in that essay it is said that if we want to measure the distance between stars, so it is just like the two ships are voyaging in an ocean, and it is remote possibility that they will come across each other. So is the case with stars. So when we think of the stars, except for the Earth or stars or planets, we tend to realize that there is no possibility of life, at least for the stars that are discovered. So we don't expect, scientists have been trying to discover about Mars, but there is no success yet. So if there is no existence of life, there is complete loneliness. So the same loneliness is now seen where the poet is moving. Though it is the earth and people are there, but people, animal, birds, they are smothered in their places. They are not coming out. So the poet says that I'm not concerned with this loneliness. Even the loneliness that is there in the stars, even that cannot make me scared of it. So I'm not even scared of that. What I am scared of, he says that I have it in me so much nearer home to scare myself with my own desert places. So he says that I have so much desert places within my own self. I'm not afraid of outer atmosphere. I'm afraid of my inner atmosphere. I'm not afraid of what is happening outside. I'm afraid what is happening inside. So he says that I have lonely places within my own self, within my heart, within my mind. So why is calling these things? Because as we listened in the beginning of these slides, that he suffered many depressions, he suffered tragedies, and he was all alone there to look after the family. So he suffered loneliness, and he is expressing that loneliness. And it is human sentiment that if you are not happy from inside, anything that is happening good outside will not give you pleasure. So he is referring to that fact that since his inner emotions are more obvious, more strong, more dominant, he is not afraid of what is happening outside. So this was the theme of the poem. So he's focusing more on loneliness in this poem. So we'll be coming back with certain more poems by Robert Frost. Thank you very much. Stay tuned. Subscribe the channel. Thank you very much.